speaker, Warren Rustand. This bio could be like pages and pages and pages long. We tried to edit it back. Warren is a husband, a father, a grandfather, an entrepreneur, a corporate leader, educator, speaker, and philanthropist. In 1973, he was selected as a White House Fellow and then appointed as a Special Assistant to the Secretary of Commerce. In 1974, then Vice President Gerald Ford became president and asked Warren to serve as the appointment secretary to the cabinet secretary to the president. Following his time in public service, Warren again entered the private sector as an entrepreneur. He served on the boards of directors for over 50 for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. He was CEO of Providence Service Corp, a $2.1 billion company, Rural Metro, a $600 million company, and TLC Vision, a $400 million company. For 30 years, Warren led a public policy conference in Washington, D.C. called Public Policy in the Private Sector. Over 6,000 CEOs participated in the program, which included meetings with the president, vice president, and other notable politicians. Warren was the global chair of the World's Presidents Organization and is the Dean of Learning for the EO Global Leadership Academy, in addition to all the regional leadership academies. He's a well-known speaker on topics of leadership, personal development, strategy, scaling businesses, entrepreneurship, and family. I have seen Warren speak 5 times, this will be my 6th. Every time I see him speak, I somehow walk into the room feeling like I've got my life all kind of dialed and working and everything's going well. And I leave his sessions feeling like a shell of a human being. but inspired to go again. I'm looking forward to just getting destroyed over the next 2 hours for Warren.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you today. I hope you have a lot of energy. Now, this is kind of an interesting seating configuration. Why don't you first all put your chair in a position that gives you the best opportunity to listen and to hear, okay? And still write something if you want to write. Just kind of fix yourself. Eye contact is always better, right? Now, I tell you, I love mountain shadows. How do you all like mountain shadows as a resort? Isn't this beautiful? I will tell you that on July 11th, coming up this summer, my wife and I are celebrating our 59th wedding anniversary. Our first night together, our wedding night, was in mountain shadows. Right? So I was excited to be here and excited that Cameron had his scheduled here. This is fantastic. I would tell you first of all about Cameron. I love Cameron. I think he's fantastic. The value he adds to people's lives, like yours, is extraordinary. He's having a big impact. You talk about what is my life going to mean? What is your life going to mean? Where are you going to have impact? Cameron's having impact. It's fantastic. Meredith is so important to this whole thing. Meredith, thank you very much. You're absolutely spectacular. And so as we think about, our time together, we've got about 2 hours together. So let's kind of put it in context. We will never have this experience again. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I have prepared for this. There are things I want to share with you today. I want you to be better because we shared time together. And that's 2 ways. It's a reciprocity, right? You have to ask really good questions, you have to make good comments, and you have to teach me as well. Education doesn't flow one way, all right? So I expect to leave here being smarter because of what I learned from you. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay, now, you're talking about bucket lists. There must be something in here. This is my bucket list. It was written when I was 19 years old. I was a philosophy student at the University of Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. That's where we live today. This paper is 61 years old. You cannot take it out of here. Happy to have you read it, but you can't take it out of here because it will disintegrate. It's kind of like my body. It's going the same kind of thing. You reach a certain age and it just begins to disintegrate, right? How old am I?
80.
I'm 80 years old. January 3rd, I'm 80 years old. I think life is about keep going. Life's about having fun. Life's doing what you want to do, right? It's just a series of fun things to do. Life is just great. I can't imagine retiring. When I was talking with my dad, I heard he was talking with some friends of his, and the word retirement came up. I didn't know what the word was. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I said, Dad, what does retirement mean? He says, living by choice. I've lived by choice my entire life. I believe in life by design. You design your life and then live that life. Why would you live any other life? Live the life you want to live. You all have that capability. We're all going to make enough money. Money's the easy part of life. The hard stuff is keeping relationships together, finding the right spouse or significant other, having great kids and educating those kids, having great life experiences. Helping other people, impacting other people, that's what life's about. Okay? So hopefully we'll get to talk about some of that stuff today. We had a great conversation just a few minutes ago. Thank you very much for asking the questions. I appreciate that. So I wrote down when I was 19 years old the 100 things that I want to do in my lifetime. And that's this list. Now, some of these things are soft and squishy and stupid, just like any 19-year-old would write, okay? And some of them are really big. Now, how many of these do you think I've accomplished? I've read this once a week for the last 61 years and then set about doing this stuff. How many of these have I accomplished? All of them. Boy, I love you guys. Fantastic. I wish I was that good.
76.
98. So I've done 98. I think there are two that I will probably never accomplish. One is I want to visit every country in the world recognized by the United Nations. But the United Nations is tricky because they keep dividing countries and offering new names. It's a moving target. I'm trying to keep up with this stuff. But I have been to 190 countries, and I'm still traveling, okay? And the other one was I wanted to be president of the United States. I think if I'd have run in 2016, I could have won because we proved we'd elect anybody during that period of time.
Would you please run it this time?
Yeah. You probably better wait until you've heard me speak before you make that judgment, right? I may say some things. So life is just fun, and I hope you sense that of us being together. I am so grateful to be in a room with you because you guys are doing it. You're getting out there. I was thinking last night, how many second-in-commands have I had in my lifetime? We've scaled 17 companies. Yeah, 17 companies. I've done about 250 acquisitions in my lifetime. All right? So how many I've had 22 second-in-commands. 8 of them were women, 14 of them were men. 9 of them were minorities. Okay? And as I thought back on that last night in preparation for this with you, I just thought about the value that those people contributed to our lives to help build organizations and how critical you all are to the success of organizations. Now, I did hear something this morning that I just want to give you a different perspective on. There isn't right or wrong here. There's no right or wrong among us today. It's just different perspectives because of our life experience. I heard the word employees being used a lot. I've never used that word because I work with friends, colleagues, and associates. Employee tends to suggest a superior and subordinate relationship because one is the employer and one is the employee. And that's not something I wanted any of our people to feel. I wanted all of our people to feel that they were colleagues, that we're working on this thing together. We have different responsibilities, different accountabilities, different titles, but we're actually going down the same road, doing the same kinds of things, trying to get to the same destination. And so it's just semantics matters, words matter, language matters. So what we say and how we say that is critical, okay? So just think about that. It's just one little thing we'll talk about today, if that's okay. Now, maybe a little deeper information about me, the stuff that would never show on a bio. I was born dirt poor in a state called Minnesota near the Canadian border, cold and gray. We had a rope that went from our house to our barn because the cows had to be milked every 5:30 every morning, whether it was whiteout conditions or snow or didn't matter. And so we would frequently go hand over hand on that rope to find the barn in whiteout conditions, milk the cows, and work our way back. There were multiple times when we opened the door to go out and there was snow from this roof to the ground, and we had to shovel our way out of our home in order to get to the rope. So I grew up on a farm where we ate what we grew. We rarely went to town because we didn't have any money to buy anything. We could buy gasoline for the tractors and stuff, and that's about it. So if any of you are ever born poor, we share a common existence. Farming is a hard life. If you think you've worked hard in your life, I've worked hard in my life. And all of the things that you do every day, I've already done over my 80 years. Making payroll, introducing new products, knowing your industry, hiring good people, firing people, all that stuff is what I've done. So we are common in our background and experience as we talk today. Is that fair? Now, there are differences. We've had different experience. Cameron just mentioned I was appointment secretary of the president. That's a little different. You know, a little kind of fun stuff. You know, the question you should ask, how did you get there from Minnesota? I mean, so at any rate, I was born and raised in Minnesota. My dad was a really poor farmer when he started and became a really good farmer over time because he continuously grew, got smarter, and he bought several farms. And after he bought his 4th farm, he said, we're moving to California. So California, didn't even know what it was. So we hopped in the car and we drove out to California. And then I grew up my teenage years in Southern California. So a place called Newport Beach. Any of you know where Newport Beach is? Pretty nice place. You imagine the difference from an isolated Minnesota farm? So the first day we're there, he says, you know, we're going down to the beach. And so when he would say something like that when we were in Minnesota, we're going out to work. I'd put on my blue work shirt, my bib overalls, and my boots, and my gloves, and my hat, and I was ready to work. So he said, we're going to the beach. So I put on my blue shirt, my bib overalls, and my boots, and my gloves, and my hat, and we were going. He kind of looked at me kind of sad. We went down to the beach, and I saw these 12 and 13-year-old girls in bikinis. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. This was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. So I got into surfing right away. And the Beach Boys and surfing. The Beach Boys were our high school band. Okay, so we've known Mike Love and Brian Wilson and those guys my entire life. Pardon me? Literally, they were our high school band. They played, literally, yes. Yes. So we've had a lot of fun over the years. When I was working in the White House, just, you know, we may end up telling stories all day with some lessons in between. I may never get to these slides that I prepared for you. But so the President of the United States, each 4th of July, has the opportunity to select the entertainment on the mall in Washington, D.C. It's a big deal. So I went into the President one day and said, Mr. President, I just found out that you get to select the entertainment. He said, I don't know anything about that. I said, well, how about the Beach Boys? He said, yeah, that sounds really good. So the Beach Boys entertained before 350,000 people on the Capitol Mall, and they had some tents for VIPs, and I was in there and stuff talking to Mike Love, who's the lead singer. And the final set was coming up, and he said, okay, here's your guitar, Warren. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you're going to come out and play air guitar and sing along with us. So I got to walk out with the guitar. I couldn't play, and we walked out there, and here are 350,000 people. You wonder why these guys do drugs and have a great time? I'm just saying, it's unbelievable. You know, the power of 350,000 people is really something. So we had a good time. So those kinds of things happened to us, and we've had a lot of fun along the way. So we moved to California, and a guy gave me a basketball and said, you know, if you just learn to dribble this, maybe something good will happen. So I learned to dribble it. And when I graduated from high school, I was a high school All-American basketball player, and I had 200 universities that wanted me to go to school and play basketball for them. I got down to UCLA and Arizona. I chose Arizona for a variety of reasons. And the first week I got there, I loved the warm sunshine. I mean, Cameron, you've lived here for a while. You know this, right? It's fantastic. Compared to Minnesota, it's not a bad place to live. And we chose Tucson because it's a small, isolated, smaller community. We're about 5.5 million people here in the valley, but down there it's 1 million folks surrounded by mountains. Good place to live. So we went down, and the third day I was there, I met the most beautiful co-ed in the entire world. She was fantastic. She's smart. She was athletic. She was beautiful. I mean, she was just, you know how sometimes you meet that person? We were just talking about that. You meet that person. And so I knew she was special. And so, you know, what is a really good-looking, chiseled out of granite guy, you know, what do? You ask her out on a date. So I asked her out on a date, and she said no. I'd never been turned down by a woman before in my life. It's unbelievable for me. My ego, I was damaged. I was bruised. So I said, well, I'll ask her out next week. Surely she made a mistake. So I asked her out the next week, and she said no again. And I asked her out the third week. She said no again. The fourth week, no again. 53 consecutive weeks I asked her out. She said no 53 times. Do you know what entrepreneurs are? They're persistent. The 54th weekend, I knew that the guy she was dating was going home for his parents' wedding anniversary, so she had an open weekend. So I'm thinking, good-looking, chiseled out of granite, this is me, right? My chance. And so I asked her out for the 54th time, and she said no for the 54th time. And so finally, you know, guys, we do stupid things when we want to impress a girl sometimes, right? So I started singing and dancing and telling jokes and trying to get her to smile, and finally she did. She said, okay, we'll have dinner together. By 10:30 that night, we said, we never have to date anyone again. I knew from the first time I met her that she was going to be special in my life. It took her a year to figure that out, okay? And I will tell you today, we're celebrating our anniversary. Every year, we have a marriage contract. She writes it and gives it to me to sign. So I sign it. It's always a one-year contract. I've been looking for a long-term deal, you know, a multi-year deal. I've never gotten a multi-year deal. I get a one-year contract. That's all I get. So she gives me a one-year contract. She always writes at the bottom, "You're still on probation," right? So that's my wife. She's fantastic. Tell you a quick story about her to give a sense of her. She is just so talented. She has just led every not-for-profit in the state of Arizona. She's been a wonderful leader in our family. She's an extraordinary woman. I've been blessed and lucky to be her companion. I'll just tell you that. And I hope each of you has that experience and can find somebody like that. We were even talking earlier, just before you came in, about how do you sustain love in a relationship over a long period of time? Because in today's world, everything is perhaps shorter and quicker, right? And it's tough. It's tough. So there are some ways to do that, and if you want to get into that kind of stuff, personal stuff, we can do that. Where was I going? What did I say?
Your wife's awesome.
Thank you very much. She is awesome. She's fantastic. She could easily be up here talking to you, and you'd think she was just off the charts good. She's a great speaker. But we decided that we wanted to have a big family after we got married. We decided we wanted to have 15 children. We thought 15 was a great number. You know, it was the number of my basketball uniform. So, and my wife,
15 after you had the first one?
And my wife said it was also my IQ. Okay, so we decided to have 15 kids. And so we were, first 4 years of our marriage, she was an educator working in a career field. I was working as a young entrepreneur. And as we moved along, we were practicing to have babies. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried that, but practicing to have babies is actually kind of fun. And we were having a good time practicing, getting better all the time. And as a result of that, we woke up when we were 4 years into our marriage. We'd been designing our life together for the next 60, 70 years. And our doctors told us it was biologically impossible for the two of us to have children. It would never happen. Well, that was a real blow to us because we wanted a big family. And we went to a cocktail party one night. There was a young guy there, a doctor who just moved to our community, who specialized in fertility and things like that, reproductive rights, all that stuff. So he put us in the hospital, checked us both out, kept my wife in a couple days longer, said he had to reconnect the plumbing and the wiring. It was technical terms. I don't know what it was. And she got out, and 30 days later, we were pregnant with our first child. And for the next 14 years, every 2 years, we had a baby. So we have 7 children. We didn't get to 15. I feel guilty about not achieving my goal. I mean, that was very important. But we got 15, 6 boys and 1 girl. Our daughter is right in the center. Her name is Kennedy. 3 older brothers that nurtured her and protected her, and 3 older boys, or 3 younger boys that she actually led. So it was really interesting. She's fantastic, just like her mom. Strong, tough, smart. So we're blessed to have 7 children, and they have produced 19 grandchildren. And we all live together, 3 generations, on a 60-acre parcel in the center of Tucson, Arizona. And so we see our children and grandchildren every single day. It's the greatest feeling in the world to wake up and being kissed by a little grandchild, or to go just watch them play outside. They're always around, they're always in our lives, and we're just lucky to do that. We're just lucky to do that. We've lived on that piece of property for 48 years. We bought it when we were coming back from the White House because I'm a farm kid, and it was farmland, and it was, at the time we bought it, it wasn't in the center of Tucson. Today it's in the center of Tucson. The city grew up around us. So it was really fun. So we can talk about those kinds of things as well. You know, so life is good. So my concern was that all of our children looked like the doctor. So I didn't quite know how all that happened. And I know when I travel, he makes house calls, so that bothers me a little bit too. So, you know, we got to work through that stuff, right? So as we think together today, we sure want to talk about business and business stuff. But there are a lot of anecdotes and stories and fun things that also teach important lessons to us. And they may come up in your mind as we're talking. So just feel free to interrupt. Just feel to stick up your hand or stand up or say, hey, I want to ask this, or I want to ask that, or do you really believe that, or does that give me an experience around that? Because it's best if we share those kinds of things. And if you want to share something, feel good about that as well, okay? Because again, I have to benefit from being here, all right? Now, this afternoon I'm having a great experience. I run from this talk, and I get to the airport, and I fly out of here to one of our grandsons. Our oldest grandson is graduating from university tonight. And so I have an opportunity to be there. You know, it's his grandfather. What a great feeling to see the progression of our children and grandchildren as they move through life, right? Now, isn't that what life's all about? Isn't that what life's all about? Yeah, we got jobs, and yeah, we got to make money, and yes, we have to support our CEOs and all kinds of stuff like that. But I think life is about so much more than that, right? It's about our humanity. It's about what we do for other people. It's about caring a lot. Cameron made a great point. The Dream On process, we use that in all of our companies and have for years. We grant wishes and dreams to those who haven't been able to achieve them or have them, we think that's really important, right? It's giving something to someone else. If you're having a really bad day, just an ugly, tough day, we all have them, go do something for somebody who's having a worse day than you are. Just go serve somebody else. You'll feel better about the day, and you'll feel better about yourself. But in this narcissistic, individualistic, ego-driven world, especially spurred on by social media, right? You've got to be really careful about managing your ego. Really careful about managing self, because we get to feeling self-important a lot, right? Because we get to be in front of the room, right? Or we get to lead an organization, or we have people reporting to us. And we get to thinking we're pretty cool. We're not any cooler than anybody else, folks. What are we doing in life? We're just walking each other back home. That's all we're doing. We're just walking each other back home. And if we can get that straight, man, can we have a good life. Edwin Markham once said, there is a destiny that makes us sisters and brothers. No one goes through life alone. All that we give all that we give into the lives of others comes back into our own. Everything we give to other people, you will find coming back to you in your own life. Really important. When I think about people who are second in command, I think about doers. When I was about 6 years old, one of the things I loved about my dad, I was the only boy, so I got to work with him all the time, get on the John Deere tractors and go plow and harvest and all that stuff. And when I was really young, I just sat on his lap. And he would quote great books. He was well educated. He had 2 college degrees, but he loved to farm. So he's doing what he loved. That's where I learned to do what I love. And so he would quote books. He would talk about places he had traveled. He'd recite poetry to me. I mean, he was preparing me for a life that he was living that he didn't want his son to live. He didn't want me to be isolated on that farm. So he was my greatest teacher. Unfortunately, he died at a very young age, and I didn't have him very long. But he was a great teacher to me. And I remember one time, I was about 6 years old, I was on his lap. And he said a little poem to me that I found kind of interesting, and maybe it's appropriate today. It's called Think. I think I'd rather not think, for thinking is like a disease. I know I'd rather not know, for stupidity comes with such ease, and not so much stupid as content with the state going through the day, knowing only that I ate. But to think means to live, and to live means to do. But doing is what is done, but only by a few. Most people are talkers. They're not doers. Most people are talkers. Author unknown. Author unknown. I can make sure I get you a copy to it if you want for it, okay? Yeah. So it's this notion that we got to be about doing stuff. I turned 80 on January 3rd. And I can tell you my best day is today. Next best day is tomorrow. We're going to do the best deal we've ever done in our lives next week. Life is about future thinking. You know, there are 3 days in a person's life. Yesterday, today, and someday. Yesterday is about lessons in history that we have learned that we bring forward to today to help us. But you all know people who live in the past, who live in yesterday. And every time you're at a cocktail party or you're out with friends or something, somebody's always going to bring up the fact that they ran the 60-yard touchdown to win the state championship, right? Because that was their highlight reel. That's the best thing they've ever done in their life. And they live in their past. They thrive on that, and they're always going to bring it up, right? But life is just a series of experiences from which we take lessons learned to bring to the current state to make us better. Don't ever get trapped in your past. Don't ever spend a lot of time in your past. It's just not worth it. I can't tell you much about my past at all because I don't think about it. We recently had a reunion of our college basketball team. Over 3 years, 77 players played on the college basketball team. We all came together to celebrate the 94th birthday of our college basketball coach. It was in our home. Of those 77 that played over that period of time, 3 have died. All the others showed up.
Wow.
They came from all over the world. It was phenomenal to see them. I hadn't seen many of them since we played together. And we gave a great tribute to our coach, and it was a wonderful experience. But some of them could remember every basket, everything we ever did as basketball players, things that I had forgotten decades ago that just weren't important anymore. But I can tell you the lessons I learned along the way. I can tell you what I brought forward to make me better today because of the experience I had there. So think of life just as a series of experiences. Bring forward from yesterday what you want to be today. And even if we're talking about yesterday, we're talking about it in the current state today. And then there's someday. Someday I'm going to be a better husband. Someday I'm going to be a better father. Someday I'm going to lose 10 pounds. Someday I'm going to stop drinking. Someday I'm going to treat my spouse the way she deserves to be treated. Someday, someday, someday. That's all just a bunch of BS. Some days don't happen for the most part. Unless you write it down and decide to check it off your list. Okay? Someday, people talk about someday. You know, someday I'm going to run a triathlon. Someday I'm going to run a marathon. Someday, right? But someday never quite comes around. Why? Because nobody's written it down. Nobody's committed to a time and date, right? And so it's just out there. So dreaming doesn't matter unless you decide you're going to actually do it. Okay? You got to go get it done. So that's what's really important about dreaming. We all have big dreams. I want to be president of the United States. Couldn't find a way there. But I got close. I worked in the White House for 4 years and had an opportunity, right? So just think about that as we kick along. Now, you've heard a lot about me, and I've been talking too much, and you guys haven't said a word yet.
I'll ask you a question.
Well, no, I'm sorry, you can't. You can ask any question you want to. I do not have to answer. I've heard about you already. I'm just worried, okay?
So you mentioned that your father didn't want you to grow up on a farm.
Yeah.
But you just chose to raise your family on a farm.
Yes.
Discuss how you lead.
I love farms. I love growing stuff. I love being around animals. So what do we have on our farm? When our kids were growing up, we had over 100 animals. Goats, pigs, sheep, chickens, cows, horses. All right? And guess who took care of them? The kids. Kids learned to work. We have big trees. We have lots of grass. We grew our own alfalfa. So when the kids were growing up, they had a lot of work to do. We can talk about how we've prepared our children. So of our 7 kids, 4 are entrepreneurial CEOs of their own businesses that they created. We didn't finance them. I've never loaned money to them. They're just out there and did it on themselves, and they're all big companies.
The question really is, it sounded like your father didn't want you to stay on a farm.
Not necessarily.
Okay, but that's what I thought.
Yeah, he thought there were bigger stages. He thought there were bigger opportunities for his children, all of his children, including my 3 sisters. And he was right. My 3 sisters all did really well. And they've done really wonderful things. They're all great people, great ladies. My mother had mental health problems. And so we struggled in our family with her behavior. And so I think that was part of it for him. He took care of her and nurtured her and cared for her as best he could, but it was a lifelong challenge for him and for our family. So we can talk about mental health and all that sort of stuff, but we understand. Okay, we're happy to talk about it. Now, not long ago there was yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Warren, you mentioned 4 of your sons are CEOs of companies.
Yes.
How many of their COOs or members of the COO?
You know, I'll get back to you on that. Remember, Cameron, I said I don't have to answer the questions, okay?
You don't get all the laughs.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So there was a study done not long ago by the Harvard Business School about the second in command. Some of you may have read about the study. But it was the notion of what are the qualities and characteristics needed and required to be an exceptional second in command, chief operating officer, integrator, whatever you want to call it. What are those qualities and characteristics? And so they traveled the globe interviewing all kinds of companies and people like yourself. And they wanted to come up with 4 symbols that best typified the leading qualities and characteristics of people who do what you do. And so after a 3-year study, they did in fact, they studied 10,000 people, and they came up with 4 symbols. I'm going to put those 4 symbols up here. And this research shows that if I give you 8 seconds to study them, one of them will be your symbol. You'll just feel a chemical, visceral reaction to one of those symbols. And then I'm just going to go through and tell you what they are, so you know what those symbols are and what the qualities and characters. Is that fair? Yep. Okay, so we all know the rules? Okay, so here, the symbols are easy. The first is a circle, second is a Z, the third is a triangle, and the fourth is a square. Now I'm going to give you 8 seconds to look at that, and you'll feel something, okay? Ready, set, go. Time, stop. Now, you all have in your mind a symbol that sort of felt interesting to you, looks to you, so let's just go back through and we'll go in reverse order. So how many of you think the square best typifies you? Just raise your hand. 1, 2. Okay, this is high IQ. Cameron, you told me this was a smart group.
I had to get yours.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. Okay, how many think the triangle? Especially now you're brave, right? So it's okay. This is creativity. How many of you think the Z pattern? Okay. Inherent, innate leadership skills and abilities. And how many think the circle? Raise your hands nice and high. This means you're absolutely addicted to booze and drugs. So here's my problem as a speaker this morning. We have two with a high IQ who are going to understand what I'm actually saying. And the rest of you are hooked on booze and sex and drugs. So let's see those hands again. How many of you are at the circle? Just raise your hands. Be proud. Be proud, you are. Yeah, go for it, Be proud of who you are. If you ever want to use that as an icebreaker with your folks, management teams or other people, go ahead and do that. That's not an actual study. I'm sure you realize that, right? We just made that up. Something to do. But I'm glad for the vulnerability. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, sex and booze. Okay, I've got both hands up. Any comments so far? Any questions so far about anything? I don't want to laugh too hard. It's not fair.
I want the circle to have deeper meaning.
You want it to have deeper meaning?
Yeah, I want the circle to have some deep meaning.
Well, we could go into the kinds of sex or booze. I mean, if you really feel strongly about it, then I've never had that question, actually.
Your college basketball coach.
Yeah.
That's remarkable that at this point, that many people, which I can't imagine that happening to my coach.
Yeah. He was an extraordinary man who impacted his players over his lifetime, not just when they played basketball for him. He stayed in touch with every player. I'll give you an example. Bradley Green, who was a spectacular young player out of Chicago back in the 70s. And Bradley had a lot of talent and was also very smart. Came out of the projects in the south side of Chicago. And after his summer session, if you think back to the 70s, there's the Black Panther movement. And Bradley got caught up in the Black Panther movement, got in a shootout with police and shot a police officer, killed him. Sentenced to life in prison. That coach wrote Bradley a letter every week for 25 years. He went to see him whenever visiting was allowed and he was in the area. So probably visited him 2 or 3 times a year. Bradley was paroled after 26 years. He made his way back to Tucson, Arizona, and he went to see his coach. His coach got him a job, got him a place to live, kept in touch with him, saw him. That's that kind of man, all right? We need to have people like that in our lives, right? Because they just care. That's who we need to be in our roles and responsibilities. We need to be people who care about other people. And if you don't have that gene, you got to figure it out. You got to work on that. It makes a difference. So I was working in October at my desk, and I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of people like you, very significant business people, and we were negotiating an acquisition. When suddenly I had an overwhelming urge to go see my basketball coach. He lived 20 minutes from me. And I couldn't fight that urge. You ever something influence you in a way that you know you should be doing something? Sometimes we resist and we put it off, right? We deny it. Sometimes we understand what it is and we act on it. I decided I had to act on that. It was so compelling. So I excused myself from the call. I picked up one of my books. I hadn't given him a book yet. And I wrote an inscription in there, a couple pages. And I drove over to his house. His daughter answered the phone. Answered the door. And she said, Dad fell last night and he can't speak. And he's not doing well. But he will recognize you. So I sat down next to him and I got to say everything I wanted to say to him. And I knew when I walked out the door, I would never see him alive again. I called my wife right away, said, you have to get over here right away. She drove over immediately and also said her farewell. He died 6 hours later. 6 hours later. But he was that kind of man. People would do anything for him because he did everything for them. Right? That's who we need to be.
As a high school senior, were you able to choose him over Wooden?
Yeah, it was a tough call.
Right. I mean,
Yeah, if I'd have gone to play with John Wooden, I'd have played on 3 national championship teams. Yeah. But I don't know how much I would have played.
But as a high school senior, like, how do you know that he would be just as special as Wooden would be? Because Wooden's a management.
The same feeling I had on that Zoom call was the feeling I had when he recruited me. Now, he was 34 years old when he recruited me. He had already won a national championship, and he had been National Coach of the Year at 34. So he already had his credentials. So he was a great coach. And John Wooden said to me after I made the decision, I called John Wooden and said, I'm sorry, I'm going to Arizona. He said, you're going to play for a great man. Yeah, he just, Wooden was classy. Wooden was really unbelievably classy. And I went on to become, after I played pro ball for a while, I went through college, I was an All-American basketball player, and then I was drafted by the Golden State Warriors. And so I played basketball for a while, but when I quit playing basketball, I went back to the University of Arizona as the assistant basketball coach while I got my graduate degree for 3 years, and I coached for the man who coached me. So it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. At any rate, we don't want to get too emotional about these things, good gracious. Can't do that. So, any questions so far? We want to cruise along. I put this watch here because I was told you could be trusted and you wouldn't steal it. This is a very expensive watch. It's a very expensive watch. Okay. Just,
I have one question.
yes.
It sounds like you've obviously doing 98 things on your list, and I'm sure everyone feels here, an incredible life. What are some of the things looking back where maybe you wish you would have shown up differently, or is there anything you regret, like, would have done differently?
There's a man out speaking and has written a book on regrets, and his view is you should hold on to regrets, right? Because you learn from regrets and you can build from regrets. And I accept that. That's good. I don't think of my life, though, in regretful terms. I've had these wonderful opportunities, some of which I've screwed up, and I've made mistakes and I've made dumb decisions. I'm as imperfect as you are, and we just do dumb stuff sometimes, and I had to learn from that. But regrets, no. I mean, I look back on my life and I say, holy cow, I've been lucky.
You're like proud.
I've just been so lucky. Things just seem to get in my way, and I get to take advantage of. I was having lunch one day with some friends in Tucson, and there was a guy I hadn't met there. He was a 4-star retired general, Air Force general. And we had lunch, had a really good time, and at the end of lunch, as we were walking away, he said, you know, I think you ought to apply for the White House Fellows Program. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, it's a nationally competitive program for U.S. citizens only. It's like the Rhodes Scholarship Program. And he said, after listening to you today and talking with you, I think you'd be a good candidate. So he gave me an application. I went back to my office, put the application in my drawer, never thought about it again. About 3 months later, I was cleaning out my office because I was moving to a new office, and I went through the drawer and I saw the application. I also noticed it was due the next night at midnight. So I stayed up all night filling out the application and writing a position paper to the President of the United States and sent it off before its due date, never thinking I'd hear another thing about it. And about 3 months later, I got a call and said, you're one of 650 national semifinalists. I said, whoa, that's kind of interesting. There were 14,700 applicants in the United States the year I applied. And I was one of 650. I thought that's pretty rarefied air. I mean, I felt pretty special. And so I had to go off and be interviewed by the President's Commission on White House Fellows, as did everyone else. It's an 11th-month selection process. Then I came to find out that I was one of 37 national finalists. And those finalists are Heisman Trophy winners, right? Astronauts, authors. I mean, it was just stunning. I was just getting to meet great people. I mean, people I'd never met. I'm a farm kid. Remember, I'm just a farm kid. And I get to meet all these cool people. And so we went to a place called the Airlie House in Virginia. It's a diplomatic retreat. There are no phones, no TVs. It's used for negotiations. And we all were there. And then the White House President's Commission on White House Fellows, headed by a man you may have heard about, Dr. Milton Friedman. Pretty good economist, Nobel Prize winner, and 15 other people with household names like his. And they interviewed us 2-on-1, 5-on-1, 10-on-1, 15 hours a day. Their job was to find out who we really are. And before we got there, they had done a full FBI field investigation on our background starting at age 5. So they knew everything about us. So they had 100 pages on each one of us. They could ask us anything they wanted, no holds barred. So we were grilled like crazy. And then the last morning, they march you into an auditorium about 6 o'clock in the morning, and there are 2 boxes, one with thin envelopes and one with thick envelopes. Well, I couldn't sleep very well the night before, and so I went in and I noticed that the thin envelopes were for those who weren't going to make it, and those with thick envelopes were. So I went through there and I found my name on a thin envelope. And I had just enough time before the others came in to move that to a thick envelope. So I was selected as White House Fellow. It was fantastic. And so what I found early on was that if you lie, cheat, and steal, you can work in government. It's okay. So I was fortunate. And then all 17 of us who were selected had to then interview with the President, the Vice President, and the Cabinet Secretaries. I was actually chosen to work for the Vice President of the United States. And by the time I started my White House Fellows year and got there, the Vice President had resigned. His name was Spiro Agnew, and he'd been taking cash under the table. And so he had resigned, there was a vacancy, so I hooked up with Fred Dent, the Secretary of Commerce, the guy you just mentioned, and I was asked to lead the first ever executive level trade mission of the Soviet Union. So we took 20 CEOs from the United States and went over negotiated trade agreements. When I got back, the minority leader of the House of Representatives, Gerald Ford, had been named by then President Richard Nixon to be his vice president. He was overwhelmingly elected by the Senate, confirmed by the Senate, and I walked up to him and knocked on his door when he was minority leader, but it hadn't been confirmed yet, and I said, "I'm your White House fellow." And he said, "What's a White House fellow?" And so I explained it to him, and we hit it off, and he's an old football player from Michigan, and I'm an old basketball player from Arizona. I was 29 years old at the time. And so I started with him the day he became vice president. And if you recall from history, that was the worst scandal in American history in the White House. Much worse than it is today, much worse than it's been over Trump or anybody else. But the end result was that 9 months later, he became the President of the United States. On August 6th, 1974, the Vice President and I were working late, and the Chief of Staff for Richard Nixon, the President, called and said, "May I come over and speak to the Vice President?" I said, "Yes." He came over, stood in front of the desk of the Vice President's looking at him, and he said those now famous words that have been written in many books, "Mr. Vice President, prepare to be President." The Supreme Court had just released the smoking gun tapes, the tapes that had implicated the President of the United States in a felony cover-up. And as a result of that, we knew that he had two choices. He would be impeached or he would resign. But in either case, Gerald Ford would become President of the United States. And I never knew whether or not, thinking about preparation in our jobs, I never knew if he'd ever really thought about being President of the United States. And without hesitation, as soon as he heard those words, he turned to me and said, "Have the following 8 people here at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning for a transition team meeting." He not only had thought about it, he knew the 8 people who were going to be closest to him as he ascended into the presidency. The next morning, we're in this conference room in the White House, and I'm the scribe. I'm the guy taking the notes, and here are these 8 people in the President of the United States. Now, my next question was, has he really thought about this transition? This is a big deal. It's going to happen in 2 days. And he pulled out 5 pages of handwritten notes, and he had not only thought about it, he had a plan to transition to the presidency, and he laid out that plan for those people, gave them all their duties and responsibilities, asked me to stay on as his appointment secretary and cabinet secretary, and boom, we went forward. 2 days later, I escorted him, I led him into the East Room of the White House where he was sworn in as President of the United States. It was an interesting time in American history, but holy cow, for a Minnesota farm kid, you know? I mean, golly, you think of what I was learning in that process. And many times I was the only guy in the room with the president and somebody else. And it was a wonderful time. The further story of leadership is, you know, we get these lessons, right? That lesson was about preparation for me. You got to be prepared for everything, right? The other lesson was that I wasn't good enough to be there. I mean, I just wasn't smart enough. I didn't have the experience. I got there through a nationally competitive process. There were many people smarter than I was. Can I try to impress you for just a second? Would it be okay? Can I drop some names? Okay, all right. So let me drop some names. So the senior group in the White House, the senior team in the White House, the people that I worked with and I was a part of, Don Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, Brent Scowcroft, Henry Kissinger, Jim Baker. That was the senior team. Those were the guys, and I was the youngest by far. You know, I didn't know what they knew, right? And so I knew that I'd probably screw up somewhere in that process, and you can't do anything in the White House that doesn't become public at some point in time. And so I knew that whatever I did wrong would come public and it'd probably humiliate the president, embarrass me, and I didn't want him to be embarrassed. He's a really good guy, smart guy. And so I knew I'd have to resign. I just knew I shouldn't be there. So we had a meeting of those people I just named in the Oval Office. We talked about some stuff, and the meeting was over, and they drifted out, and I lingered behind, and I said, "Mr. President, may I speak with you?" He said, "Yes, sit down." Well, it's intimidating enough to be sitting across from Abraham Lincoln's desk, okay? And the President of the United States, and so Mr. President, not smart enough, not political enough, don't have the experience, boom, here's my letter of resignation. I don't want to hurt you. He didn't touch it. He turned and looked out across the south lawn of the White House and looked across the Rose Garden for what seemed like 6 or 8 hours, probably about 10 seconds. I was a little anxious at the time. And he turned back to me and said, "Warren, the very fact that you have said this qualifies you to be here. The very fact that we have the same values, transparency, honesty, vulnerability. The very fact that you said this means I can trust you." And from that point on, he trusted me with stuff that no 29-year-old farm kid should have been trusted to do. I traveled the world for him, meeting with kings and queens and prime ministers and all kinds of people, carrying messages from the President of the United States. So it was a wonderful experience for me. If I'd have been the President, I would have never trusted me to do that, okay? But it was a wonderful thing for me to get to do. And so I was there until I was about 33 years old, and then we may never get to these slides, Cameron. Is that okay? I don't know. And remind me to tell you the tennis story, okay? Just remind me to tell you that. But I was having lunch with George H.W. Bush. He was one of the guys I didn't mention, who was also in the White House at the time. He was head of the CIA. And we were having lunch at the end of the Ford administration. He said, well, Warren, what are you going to do? After you leave the White House, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to go back to Arizona, and I'm an entrepreneur. I'll figure it out. He said, well, there's a little shipbuilding company down in Louisiana. The CIA uses it as a front to infiltrate third world countries. And it's being sold, and we want to make sure it's not sold to foreign hands. So would you go down and just analyze it for me and tell me whether it's a good company or not? And if it's a good company, I'll have some of my Texas oil guys buy it. I said, great. So I flew down to Morgan City, Louisiana, the center of offshore oil activity. And I flew in there, and I spent 3 days with the CEO and his team. And it's just a neat little company, not a big company, $10 million in revenue, $1 million net after tax. The margins were really good. Revenue was okay. But I liked the company. And so I flew back, and I sat down with Mr. Bush, and he said, what'd you think? And I said, I think it's a good company. It's got some upside potential. He said, great, I'll have my Texas oil guys buy it. And I said, no, I want to buy it. He said, oh, do you have any money? I said, no, I don't have any money. I've been working for the government, for crying out loud. I'm not taking anything under the table. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't have any money. He said, well, do you know anybody that has money? I said, I know a couple guys. And I'd become friends with two guys from Ada, Michigan. Anybody know what company's located in Ada, Michigan? Little tiny town. A little company called Amway. One of the largest privately held, most profitable companies in the entire world. And so he said, well, when's this thing have to close? And I said, Friday. This was Tuesday. So I called up my friends, Jay Van Andel and Rich DeVos, who were the co-founders of Amway, and I said, I've got an idea. I think we can make some money and have some fun. And they said, great, come on up. And we sat across the conference table, and I laid out the business and what we thought we could do with it. And then I said, would you finance this for us? And their first question, well, how much are you putting in? I said, I'm not putting in any money. I don't have any money. But you can trust me. You ever hear that? You can trust me. And so he said, after a long conversation, he said, well, look, we like you, we trust you, we've known you for a few years, we trust you, and when do you need the money? And I said, tomorrow? And they transferred 100% of the purchase price. And the only thing they said when we walked out the door, take care of our money, and we shook hands. We had no contract between us whatsoever. They financed 100% of that business. So my college roommate and I, also a basketball player, right? It takes two basketball brains to make one good business. We're not very smart, okay? We're not very smart. So we went down there and started running this company, and we had a wonderful experience with it. We paid our Van Andel and DeVos back. We paid them back in 18 months, kept them as a 10% carried interest just to say, hey, thank you very much for doing this, taking the risk. And we sold it 4 years later. It was doing $367 million in revenue and $87 million of EBITDA, and we sold it for a 5 times multiple. So when I was 36 years old, I had achieved one of my goals on my list, which was to be a millionaire by that time, okay? So if you think about that, if you multiply 5 times 87, what do you come up with? $450 million about. So when I was 36 years old, that's what we deposited in our bank account, okay? And I was so smart, I thought everything I touched turned to gold, that I promptly lost half of that, okay? Making stupid investments, just dumb things that I did, because I thought I was smarter than anybody else. And sometimes when our ego gets in our way, and we think we're really cool, and that we're smarter than anybody else, we get slapped pretty hard. I got slapped pretty hard. But I had enough that we could do some other things. And so we continued then to buy companies and build companies. So we've had a chance to scale 17 companies, 5 of which we've taken public. 3 are the largest in the world at what they do. So we've had a good run. It's been a lot of fun. And it hasn't been me, it's been us collectively. We have a team of people that do that. They're a lot smarter than I am. We have a good time. Any questions about any of that stuff that I'm talking about?
What are the 3 companies? The 3 that are the biggest in there?
TLC Vision, which is the largest LASIK eye surgery company in the world.
Right.
Okay? And you may know a guy named Tiger Woods. Maybe you heard of him. So I got a call, I was chairman of the board, I got a call from a guy who said, I need to have my eyes done. I'm a professional golfer, and the dust and all that stuff's getting in the pollen. He said, what people don't know is that I've actually been legally blind since I was 3 years old, 2600 vision. But I wore contacts and I wore glasses off the course, and people just don't know. And of course, at some point in the conversation, I said, well, what's your name? He was 26 years old at the time. His name was Tiger Woods. Do you know what he was at 26 years old? He's the #1 athlete on planet Earth. #1 athlete on planet Earth. Okay? Most recognizable name on planet Earth. And he was taking a risk to have his eyes done, okay, when LASIK eye surgery was pretty early, but he knew he had to do that to take the next big step in his game. So we set him up with our best doctor in Washington, D.C. He got his eyes done. I was there. He sat up out of his chair and he read a sign 2 blocks away on a parking garage that he hadn't been able to read since he was 3 years old. He had 20/15 vision. Well, what did he do next? He went out and won 7 consecutive PGA tournaments. And he called me and said, I just want to thank you for the miracle. I said, it wasn't me, it was the doctors. And he said, you know, I used to think the hole was this big. The hole is this big. I used to think my golf club was this big. My golf club is this big. He said, I can see everything like I've never seen before. And he's gone on to be arguably the greatest golfer of all time. He's had all kinds of problems and issues and all the junk, right? 8 surgeries, and his game's probably over now because of what's happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But an extraordinary talent. And so he called me up about 2 years after the surgery and said, I forgot to ask you one. He said, do you have an international spokesperson? I said, no, we don't. He said, well, I want to be your spokesperson. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened. I'm telling everybody. And we just started seeing celebrities coming in and pro athletes coming in like we'd never seen before, and it was Tiger Woods. He was generating that throughput for us. And I said, well, listen, Tiger, I know the kind of contracts you're signing, you know, $10 million a year minimum guaranteed, 3 years and all that kind of stuff. I said, we can't afford that. We're still a young company. He said, what can you afford? Can you afford $1 million a year? And I said, yes. He said, great, I'll be your international spokesperson. He never once raised his price. 7 one-year contracts, all at $1 million. He sent us 34% of our gross revenue. 34%. He could have charged us $20 million. He wouldn't do it because he saw it as a miracle for him. And it was unbelievable. So it was amazing, just amazing. And he thanked us over and over again. And then came that fateful Thanksgiving day where his wife chased him out of the house with a 9-iron, right? And he had done all the bad stuff. He called me. And he said, I just want, because he got fired by Accenture. He got fired by everybody. He lost $110 million in annual revenue in 24 hours after the event. So he called me. He said, Warren, I just want to apologize to you. I'm embarrassed to you, and I've embarrassed TLC Vision. And so I said, well, let's think about this. I said, you're not just our spokesperson, you're our patient. So I said, maybe we can think. So I went to the board of directors, and I had an idea. And so we went back to Tiger, and we said, here's the deal, Tiger. We're not going to fire you. But we're not going to use you in any advertising because none of the women in our organization, about 80% of our organization is women, want to be associated with you in any way. We understand that. We're not going to use you at all. But for the rest of your life, we can use you whenever we want to and if we choose to. But you can never quit us. And we'll pay you not $1 million a year for your contract. We'll pay you $200,000 a year to have that right. If you ever rehabilitate yourself and your reputation, we get to use you again. But you can't ever quit us. Oh, and by the way, that $1 million a year, we want you to write a check for $1 million a year to your soon-to-be ex-wife, Elin, that we had gotten, a terrific woman. She was building a children's center. She was getting her degree in psychology and working with young kids. We want you to write on our behalf a check for $1 million a year to her. He's honored that every single year. So for us, when he'd show up to do videos and he'd show up to do promos and all pictures and all that stuff, he was immaculately dressed, never had an entourage, all by himself, had memorized every word, was a completely honorable, honest gentleman. So that's the kind of experience we had with him, right? And that may not be true of everybody, but that was our experience with him. So we had to honor that relationship. So does that make sense to you? I mean, it's just kind of how we thought about it. Please.
How did y'all come up with that solution? Is that just the board just brainstorming for a while?
No, it's a solution I took to the board. I said, here's how I'm thinking about it. How would you feel about this? And we talked about it a bit, and then they got on board with it. So it worked out okay, yeah.
Warren, could you tell me, like, about, you're 36 years old.
Yeah.
You got married.
Yep.
You have children and all of this.
Yep.
Something that we've talked about a lot today is this week has been just going deep in relationships and personal life in relation to work, too. So how is your wife supporting you
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
que-
that's intense, high stress, lots of work.
Well, it's only stress if you make it stress. Stress is what we put on ourselves. I don't believe in stress. You want to see stress? Let me tell you what stress is. I don't believe. I honest to God have never believed in stress. Stress is something you decide for yourself. Nobody can put stress on you. Nobody. Okay. So you all are the center of the known world, right? We all believe that we're the center of the known world. Our ego tells us that. But would you agree there are some things that you control in your life? What do you control? Yourself. What else? Okay, you control what you wore today. You control your hair, you control your car, you control lots of things. We control tons of things. We make decisions, hundreds of decisions every day on stuff that we control. Okay, so would we agree then? Let's just put control up here. We control what we say, what we eat, how we exercise. We control a ton of stuff. So we control. Now, would you also agree there's things we don't control? Okay, what are some things we don't control? The weather. What else? In Arizona, you know, we're thinking about not even hiring weather people. Because they all say the same thing, warm and sunny, warm and sunny. That's it, it's every day. So what don't you control? No other things you don't control. Other people, what they say to you, what they do, how they act, right? What else? Stoplights. Well, yes. You're right. I like that one. It's the first time I've ever heard stoplights. I think it's fantastic. What else? What else? Anything else you don't control? Relationships. You have a piece of that, right? How about climate change? You control climate change? The fact that the seawater is rising, for instance. I mean, so there are just tons of things we don't control. There are things over which we have no control. We agree on that, right? All right, so let me ask you, why would you have stress over something you control? You control it. Why would you have stress over it? Why would you ever think twice about something you control? You make the ultimate decision. Nobody else gets to make it. You get to make it. What you wear is what you wear. What you say is what you say. Nobody controls that. Nobody has a filter on you. So why would you ever feel stress, anxiety, or nervousness over things that you control? And I was asked that of an audience one time, and a lady raised her hand. She said, I'm anxious over the fact that my parents might die. And I said, stop being anxious about it. Your parents are going to die. It's a matter of when, and are you prepared for it? How about putting your effort into preparing for their death? Okay? Let's get their wills, let's get their trusts, let's get their funeral planned, let's get everything done. All right? And then you can just ride that out and have a great last experience with your family, with your parents, with your mom, your dad, whoever it might be. So we tend to get all wrought up and caught up in our shorts about stuff that's just not that big a deal. We all have deadlines. We all have stuff we've got to do. You don't have any more pressure than I have. But I ain't going to worry about it. All I can do is all I can do. I can't do any more than all I can do. Right? Now, how many of us felt pressure if we were in college and exams were coming up? You know why we felt stress and pressure? Because we didn't study. And we crammed, we stayed up all night long to get ready for the exam. Doggone right you felt pressure, right? But you put that on yourself. If you'd started studying 2 weeks earlier, you wouldn't have had to stay up all night to study. Deadlines in our businesses all the time. Pressed against those deadlines. Why? Because you haven't prepared well enough and you didn't get your work done soon enough. Change the narrative. Take control of your life. Plan your life. That's life by design. My wife and I absolutely believe we lived our whole life by design. Now, there are certain things that happen that you don't expect to happen, absolutely. But you can live your life by design. But don't get feeling stressed. My gosh, that takes a toll on your body and on your mind. You pay a price for that. You'll start looking 80 when you're 40 if you're not careful, okay? So don't stress over things over which you have complete control. Now, why would you stress over things over which you have no control? You don't have to be prepared because you have no control. Stoplights. I know you want to talk about stoplights.
You can't control when your parents die or not, but you can be prepared for it.
Yeah, just prepare for it. That way there's no stress. All right, so Archie, I just finished revising all of our estate plans and stuff. I've dictated my entire funeral, where I'm going to be buried, who's going to build my coffin. We have a cemetery on our property. We have a family cemetery. We're going to be buried in our family cemetery. I was a little concerned a few weeks ago because my wife started digging early. Okay, it was I was just a little concerned, you know what I mean?
When's your contract up?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me. So I try to overemphasize the point. Stop putting pressure on yourself. Okay? There are 3 things that you as a leader in your business have to do. First, you have to have a clear vision of where you're going. Second is you have to prepare to execute against that vision. And third, you have to actually execute. You do those 3 things and your life's going to be a lot easier. Vision, preparation, execution. Vision, preparation, execution. If you do that, you're going to be fine. Okay, you're going to be fine.
That's what the circle was.
You like to think that. So just try to put yourself in a position where you enjoy life and where you have fun. And just know that this is just temporary. There are billions of years that the earth has been in existence. There are hundreds of thousands to several million years when man has been on planet Earth. Right? Would we all agree on that? More or less, rough. How long is your life in relationship to how long the earth has been here? How long is your life in comparison to when man first appeared? It is a nanosecond in time. My question to you is, what are you going to do with your nanosecond? You're here 75, 80 years, you're here that long. What are you going to do with your nanosecond? That's the only thing that matters. What are you going to do? What imprint are you going to make? What legacy are you going to leave? Who's going to remember you and why? That's what life's about. And don't get caught up in pressure and stress and all the junk. I just read an article yesterday where ADHD is on a rise dramatically in the United States. Right? Why do you think that's happening? Why all of a sudden does ADHD appear? We've known for years we have more children with ADHD than we've ever seen before. We own mental health facilities, right? So we observe these things, and it's pretty interesting. So there are lots of things that are happening and changing. What else should we talk about? How about some things that you ought to be thinking about? Let me put the premise before you that the world post-COVID is going to be dramatically different than the world pre-COVID. And if you haven't figured that out yet, you better get on it right away. Think about what's happened in the last 25 years. How many of you were a mature adult in the last 25 years? Since 1997, 1998. Okay.
I didn't know if I should raise my hand.
Yeah, the word mature may throw you. So it's this notion of what's happened? Well, bird flu, swine flu, HIV, the tech crash in 2000, the global financial crisis in 2008, 9, and 10. COVID-19 in 20. The derivatives of that we're still experiencing. It hasn't gone away. It's still there. Inflation, recession, taxation, right? Think of all the things just in the last 25 years. In the last 25 years have been 18 great years. Stock market going like it's been fantastic, but there have been 5 really difficult years. 5 really difficult years. There are many people in your workforce, colleagues and associates of yours, that only know this. They've never been in a tough time. So when things get tough, they're going to walk out your door. Why? Because there's a labor shortage across the world right now. And this is a long-term problem, not a short-term problem. You better gear up to solve the labor problem in your company. This is not a short-term issue. Because replacement rates, birth rates, are declining most of the developed world. The undeveloped world, birth rates are still high. But in the developed world, birth rates are shrinking. In the United States right now, the replacement rate is at 1.6. We need 2. We need 2 people per family, 2 kids per family. And it's at 1.6 and declining.
And that's the highest in the developed world.
So,
Ours is higher.
yeah, so you just have to be ready for the world ahead is different. Leadership, it's going to be very different going forward than it has been in the past, I believe.
There's another big stat on over the next, by 2050, 100 million workers will exit the workforce because of the one-child population policy in China. So it's globally. It's not just what's going on here in the United States. It's globally the workforce is going to shrink. So
Yeah, China
it's a
because
long-term problem.
China because of the one-child policy has many more men than it has women. About 6% of its population will never marry.
Right.
So what do you do with men? You have a lot of testosterone in your population. What do? You build a great military. You build a great military, which is what the Chinese are doing. Okay, that's why they're an imminent threat. We could go into all the politics of that and all that stuff. But the point is that there are things that are happening right now that you haven't seen before. So let me suggest to you there are 3 principles of success that you all should execute in the next little while. I would say over your entire life. They've been the bedrock of any success that I've had or that we've had as a family. It's been about these 3 things. First, I just mentioned one, clarity of vision. Clarity of vision. You have to be able to see your future clearly. So walk out into your future 3, 4, 5 years and plant the flag and say, in 5 years, this is where I want to be. I can see it, I can feel it, I can taste it. And then walk yourself backwards to current state and create all the milestones you have to hit to get there. Okay? I was having dinner one night with 3 of my climbing friends about 25 years ago, mountain climbing friends. And I said to my first friend, I said, what are you going to be doing for the next 25 years? And he said, well, I want to just climb mountains. I love the mountains. I'm going to be outdoors. And I said, great. I asked my second friend, what are you going to do? He said, well, I want to try to climb the highest mountains on the 7 continents. I said, that's terrific. I asked my third friend, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to climb Mount Everest by the time I'm 21. Who had the clearest view? Yeah, his name is Jamie Clark. He lives in Calgary, Canada. He climbed Everest when he was 21, 23, and 25. Have any of you seen the movie Everest? Pretty intense movie. He was in base camp the day those 40 climbers tried to ascend the mountain, 19 of whom died. Almost half the group died that day. And so rather than climb the mountain the next day, he was involved in the rescue and bringing bodies down of those people. Jamie's one of the great public speakers of all time, one of the really most interesting storytellers of all time. But once he made that clear decision of, I want to go to Everest by the time I'm 21, it simplified his life. Then he had to make only a few decisions. Who are my climbing partners? How much money do we have to raise? Where are our base camps? And what kind of equipment are we going to take? That was it. Your life becomes simple the more clear you are about where you're going with your life. So clarity of vision is the first great principle of success. The second great principle is certainty of intent, meaning we have to intentionally act on our vision every day. Certainty of intent. So what's your plan to get there? You have to have a plan. I wrote down my 100 things. That was my plan. That was my bucket list. Those were my experiences that I was going to have in life. What's yours? Where are you going? First, clarity of vision. Next, certainty of intent. I'm going to intentionally act on my vision. All right? Have a plan for that. And the third great principle of success is the power of values. How you live your life matters. How you model behavior matters. What you do so that other people observe you, watch you, and want to be like you matters. So how we live our lives really counts because we influence scores of other people regularly. They may be working with you in your business. They may be community members where you're donating time. They may be your own children, your spouse, and others. Right? But how we live actually matters. If you think for a second that what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, you're crazy. It doesn't happen. You can't broach and breach your values and expect to be the same person afterwards. There's a price to pay for it. It often involves the word forgiveness. Okay? First forgiving yourself for doing something stupid, and then forgiving others for hurting them. Okay? So those 3 things, clarity of vision, certainty of intent, and the power of values, if you adhere to those, they will change your life. Okay? Be really strict about it. But just decide where you're going. My wife and I did that for 4 years. Before we found out we couldn't have children, we planned our whole life together. We wanted to live on a farm. Right? We knew that. We wanted to raise our kids on a farm. We wanted to live in Tucson, Arizona. We lived in Europe for a while. We lived in Washington, D.C. for a while. We had a home in Oklahoma for a while because we were doing different kinds of things. But we always saw Tucson as our home, and we always returned there. Right? So decide where you're going to live. We tell our children, decide on your lifestyle first, your career second. Your lifestyle first. How do you want to live your life? Do you want to wake up with sunshine every day? Live in Arizona. We have sunshine every day. We get so excited when there are clouds in the sky, we go outside and point and stare. It's just fantastic. Oh, there's a cloud, there's a cloud. It's fantastic. You know, rain we get 2 or 3 days a year. I mean, it's just fantastic, right? So this notion of where do you want to live? What's your lifestyle, right? So decide that first, and then decide how to make a living. You can make a living anywhere. We didn't intend for our children to live with us on our property. That's not why we bought the property. Our children are all really great friends of each other. Wonderful family environment. My wife has fostered that. I give her 100% credit for our family. She's phenomenal with children and with family. And, but they all graduated from great universities. They're all off starting to do their careers and so forth. But they got together and said, how do you think Mom and Dad would feel if we all moved back to Tucson and built homes on the property? How do you think you'd feel as a parent? Holy cow, is this the greatest thing of all time? It took us 3 years to rezone the property. And then we gifted them 4 acres each so they could use the equity in the 4 acres to leverage the construction loan to build their homes. So they've all built their homes on our property. You're all welcome to come by and see us if you're in Tucson. We'd love to see you. Yes?
Yes, sir.
You still worried about the word mature?
That's right.
Okay.
Reconsider it. I'm really passionate about raising my children with this path. Can you recommend any steps maybe that was in your design plan for life that helped your children achieve? You mentioned 4 children that started their own business.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is you have to decide what's the most important thing in your life. In ours, it's family. We think there are 4 buckets in life. Now, I was looking at the circle back there with the 8, but the 4 buckets for us are family, business, community, and self. Family is always first for us. So when I make up my schedule, I put down all the family activities and all the children's activities before I put anything business on my schedule. In the old days when we used to write it in hand, I'd use red ink to put down the family stuff. Everything else was written in pencil. Everything else was cancelable. I could erase it, but not my family stuff. A few years ago, I was selected as Father of the Year, okay? And they did a video with all 7 of our children, unbeknownst to me. And at a banquet for 1,000 people, when they gave me the award, they played that video. And they asked each of our children, what do you remember most about your dad? What would they say, men, if they asked you that? What would they say, ladies, if they asked you that? What do you remember most about your mom or dad? What would they say? That never comes home from work, always busy, never shows up at my games? I'm as busy as you are. So what did they say? Every single child said the same thing using different language. He's always there, and the only thing he talks about is family. So even though we've got 7 children all in business, we have rules. No business talk at home. 0, none. You want to come to our house? Great. Put your cell phone in the basket at the front or the back door. We don't use cell phones in our house. We're there for human relationships. We're here to have conversations. We put boundaries. My boundary is I don't go to work before 8 o'clock in the morning, and I don't work after 6 o'clock at night. My office is 5 minutes from my home, and I get in my car. I have 5 minutes to transition from being a business person to being a father and a husband. And when I walk in that door, I kiss my wife and give her a hug. Why? Because my children need to see that I love my wife and their mother. And then I'm all in as a father until they go to bed. You start doing that when they're little, and you solve most of the problems of the world. Most of the problems. Simple stuff. Yes?
When it comes to like the boundaries around talking about business, for the longest time, I always said that me and my dad are best friends. And then I realized literally the only thing we talk about is business. And I didn't really know him outside of that, and he didn't know me outside of that. But I did feel like talking about business with him was why I felt so close to him growing up. And so how did you navigate those like business and pouring into them around that? Like you had a lot of rules around that not being part of those.
Yeah, I didn't want to bias our children by talking about business all the time because they may want to be doctors and lawyers. They may want to do a host of other things that aren't directly business related. The second thing is, I'm tired of business at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
I don't need to talk about business anymore. We have a family dinner every Sunday afternoon at 4:30. You want to have a lot of fun, come to our family dinner. 32 of us have dinner together, okay?
Wow.
All right, and we just all get together. We sit around and talk. We never talk business. One of our sons just had to put together a combination of companies, and it was valued at $1.2 billion. He just brought in $110 million of private equity. It's going public in a year. The name of the company is Lumino, if you want to buy stock. Lumino, okay? And it'll go public in about a year. We don't talk about that stuff. Now, our sons and I all have offices in a common building, so I get to see them every day. So we share back and forth about business and so forth and so on. But we just don't do that at home. That's not what our home is about. And we're not in business together. We made that rule starting at 8 years of age. 2 years, 2 things we said to our children. Number one is you will never inherit any money from your mom and I. And what happens when you tell your kids they're not going to inherit anything? They go off and get their butt working to prepare themselves, right? Because they're going to starve to death otherwise. Cameron?
So I had to have that discussion with my dad where my dad was So
Yeah.
I'm going to talk to you about that too. But it was a course reset.
Mhm.
Fell into that habit, and then it was okay. Then
Yeah.
how's your golf, how's your hiking, how's your wife?
Yeah. The thing is, I would never want our children to believe they get to be wealthy because I'm wealthy. They have to make their own wealth, and we make that abundantly clear to them. So what happened was they went off and became top students, top athletes, went to great universities. They're totally prepared, and they've all been successful at what they've chosen to do. There is no family business. Even though I'm still working, there's no family business for the family to come into.
I wanted to ask a question to go back to your first big hit. What do you do with that boat company to take it from the 10 million to?
We did 4 or 5 acquisitions. We introduced some new products. We happen to know King Fahd, the head of Saudi Arabia. I got to know him in the White House.
Okay.
Made a couple calls. He bought a bunch of boats. Okay, it worked real well. It helps to have friends in high places. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sorry, no, not a CEO, if I may just ask a question. It's kind of a big question, so I don't know. How do I get the hundreds of millions I need for my orphanages and art without giving up any control of how it is spent? You talked about getting funding for that business, and I don't know exactly.
Yeah, well, first of all, we had a private equity company for a while. I got kind of bored and tired of the business, and so we sold it off. I think money is always available for the right cause and for the right things to do. Always money available. It's a matter of how do you find it. Is it a not-for-profit? Yeah. For not-for-profits, I think you have to go to family offices who share some of those same philosophies about orphanages, children, and so forth. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of family offices across the United States. They tend to be more passive. They tend to not want control. They tend to be long-term investors. We've used family offices. That's essentially what we did when we borrowed for the boat company. All right? Long-term investors, passive, didn't want control, willing to let us run the business. Okay? And then you want a really strong operating agreement with the money that comes into your business that allows you to operate the business the way you feel it's best and keeps the money out of there. Right? They can get a return on their investment, but they can't run the company, kind of thing. You might also find someone who just fits in your wheelhouse. You come across them, you stumble across them, and they love what you're doing. High net worth individuals, for example, would be the second category. Go to a Warren Buffett. He's invested in some really interesting not-for-profits. Okay? You go to the former wife of Jeff Bezos, who is giving away billions of dollars. She's decided to keep $1 billion for herself. She feels like that'll pay her bills. But she's going to give away $34 billion. Okay? And it's all about not-for-profits. If you can get to her in some way, somebody like that. Okay? I found people generally to be very charitable. And if you've got a good message and a good story, I found people are willing to invest. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like Jeff Bezos' wife, but she will still have control over it. You're saying like the operating.
No, she doesn't want control at all. She gives outright gifts.
Yeah.
Just gifts.
Straight grant.
I mean, I'll do some research on my own, but I guess what will be the next step to get towards her? Like,
Yeah.
just research
There are actually ways you can figure out, we're all 6 degrees from people we know, right? So you can find ways to do that. Don't give up, just be persistent.
If I might share, there's something called familyofficelist.org that if you don't have those immediate connections to the family offices, you can go and find a list. And it'll just give you a list of everyone. And we call everyone through and find the people that really align with our values as a company. And once we've aligned with values, right, we can make propositions that way. So it's been really helpful for us.
Remember the story I told about President Ford allowing me to stay on the staff even though I tried to resign? Why? Because we had alignment of values. It's really important. The Disney family does a lot. Huge, huge foundation. Okay, so there are organizations around, I bet, that can help you. And we can talk more about it if you want to contact me separate and apart from the meeting. I'll be more than happy to chat with you about it. Okay? See you. Come down to Tucson to visit our family. Yeah, that's right. As soon as you walk in the door, there will be... We don't invite immature people. We have plenty of immature people on the farm, okay? We don't need any more. So I said you were supposed to remind me about a tennis thing, right? And you didn't. So thank you so much. And it has nothing to do with stoplights, so we're going to be okay. So we had a group of 4 that played tennis at the White House whenever we were all in town together. So it was the President of the United States, it was Don Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense, it was George H.W. Bush, head of the CIA, and this 29-year-old farm kid. And so we'd play tennis together on the White House tennis courts, great place to play. And so one day we're out there playing, and any of you who play tennis know that if someone hits a short lob, the President was at the net on one side, I was at the net on the other side, and Don Rumsfeld hit a short lob, tried to get it over my head, failed, and so I got back, took a couple steps back, hit the ball as hard as I could. I was a young athlete, I was going to show him how tough I was. I ripped the ball. It went off my racket at kind of a strange angle, hit the President of the United States, right in the diaphragm. He went down like a bull moose shot with a 30-06. I mean, boom, on his face, right? So my first thought is, I've killed the President with a tennis ball. My second thought is, I'm now unemployed. That was the two thoughts that I had. So we rush over to him, the Secret Service comes over, and we could discern no visible sign of life when we got there. He wasn't breathing, we couldn't get a heartbeat. I mean, we were, how do you explain to the public that I killed a guy with a tennis ball, right? So anyway, he starts coughing and spitting and wheezing, and he gets up and dusts himself off, and he grabs the nearest Secret Service agent, points at me and says, "Kill him." So Mr. President, wait, you only get to make these decisions once, okay? Let's think about this, let's talk about this, all right? So you have those fun experiences, Fun story about my wife, to give you a sense of who she is, but we'd come back from Australia, about 30 hours of flying, some canceled flight, I mean, just a long trip. We were tired, and you know how it is when you get in your own bed for the first time after you've been away a while, it just feels good. Got your pillow, blankie, you got everything there. And so we're lying, facing each other, holding hands, our eyes meet, and times like that, men tend to ask those deep philosophical questions, so really serious questions like, if I died, would you marry again? Those kinds of deep questions. And so I was thinking, and I said, honey, if I lose everything, the cars, the boats, the planes, the stocks, the bonds, the ranch, the condos, if I lose everything, would you still love me? And she thought for a second, then she said, yes, I'd still love you, and I'd miss you too. So now you have a sense of my wife, okay? I think she was saying, don't take me for granted. So I think, let's not take this stuff for granted. Let's just not, we can have so much fun in life. See the good side. Be an abundance thinker, not a scarcity thinker. Be an abundance thinker. People get tired of scarcity thinkers because they tend to be negative. Don't be sarcastic. People get tired of sarcasm real fast. Don't be sarcastic. Enjoy life. See the humor in life. I mean, I got to believe, and I don't know what your religious faith is, but let's assume there's a God. I got to believe he looks down on us and just laughs most of the time. To see the stupidity of what we do and the dumbness of what we do. And he's given us so many resources and so many things, And I got to believe, if he's there, he's got a good sense of humor, right? Because he's certainly going to laugh at me, because I make all kinds of mistakes, right? All right, let's pause for just a second. Any questions, any thought? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. With the business role that you guys had, did you and your wife keep those things separate as well, or did you guys ever cooperate any companies or initiatives together?
No.
Never?
Never. No. So when we got married, we knew we wanted to have a big family. So we sat down and we said, okay, how should we decide who stays at home full time? And we decided to flip a coin. I lost, I had to go to work. She got to stay home. So we believe if you have a big family, well, our belief is that the mother is so important to the nurturing of the children, particularly from age 1 to 3. The child is largely formed personality, intellect, and everything socially by the time you're 3 years old. So you guys got to be there. And if you're having 7 of them, you got to be there for all of those, right? So that's the decision we made. And so she decided to translate her career into the not-for-profit world. So she's led every significant not-for-profit in the state of Arizona. She's better known in the state than I am. She's a remarkable woman. And when we do not-for-profit stuff, we just take our kids with us. Our kids grew up at the homeless shelter. Our kids grew up in the soup kitchen. Our kids grew up helping people. How else do you teach them unless you take them along? So we just take them along. So, let me quick story. Cameron, I may need 2 more hours this afternoon. Is that a possibility? No, don't start that. So every day I work out every day, and so every day I work out, I go to the same Circle K, and I get my Gatorade. I got to replace some electrolytes because I do cardio pretty hard. And so as a result of that, I go to that Circle K, and I know the clerks, know everybody there. And one day I walked in, and there was a new person sitting out front that I'd never seen before. He had light blue jeans, white t-shirt, long blonde hair, piercing blue eyes. Everything he owned was in a bag, clearly homeless. So I bought 2 bottles of Gatorade that day, and when I walked out, I offered him one. He held up his hand. He didn't say anything to me. He rejected it. Every day I went there, he was there, and he'd be there 14, 15, 16 hours a day. I found out he lived under a bridge 150 yards away. As the weather got colder and colder in the desert in the wintertime, I noticed he had a Sub-Zero sleeping bag somebody gave him. I noticed he had some new warm clothes on, flannel shirts and so forth. Every day I went there, I kept buying him food and so forth. One day I went there and I said, here's my cell phone, do you have somebody call? He gave me the most chilling answer. He said, I have no one to call. Can you imagine what a life would be like where you have no one to call? No parents, no siblings, no friends, no one to call. And then I went there one day and he wasn't there. I asked the clerks inside, where'd he go? I said, well, I don't know. They said, there was a curly-haired woman who came in and kind of middle age, and she hit it off with him, and they were talking, and she'd get him food and so forth, and she got him a sleeping bag and some new clothes and stuff like that. And then there was a young man who came in about his age, and they would start talking, and they seemed to really get along well. And then one day they just got in the young man's car and drove away. Nobody's seen him since. I said, well, that's interesting. Kept getting my Gatorade. About a year later, I was reaching in to get my Gatorade, and something moved to my left. And it just caught my attention. I turned to my left, and there were those piercing blue eyes that I'd seen on the young man out front much more earlier. And I said, I think I know you. And he said, I know, I wasn't very nice to you. He said, you see, my dad used to beat me, and I couldn't stand to talk to an adult male. I said, I understand. But I said, look at you, three-piece suit, white shirt, tie, wingtip shoes, hair's cut. Tell me your story. I'm interested in stories. And he said, well, I was just struggling with everything in life. And I used to come here and sit because it was safe. And you came up, and I couldn't talk to you at all. But there was a middle-aged woman who came, and she reminded me of my mom, and I loved my mom so much, and she died. I loved her so much, but she reminded me of my mom, and she would just talk to me. She just loved me. She just accepted me. She just cared for me. She got me clothes and worried about me, just like my mom did. And then one day a young man came in, about my age, and he just started talking to me. And one day he said to me, I know a place that can help you if you want to be helped. And he said, I was just at a point where I said, yes, I want to be helped. So we got in his car, and he drove me to a place called La Frontera. La Frontera means the pioneer. It's a mental health facility. And he said, I met psychologists and psychiatrists and caseworkers, and they helped me. They started peeling back the layers that had built up over the years and getting back to my core and helping me discover who I am and who I could be. And I said, that's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. And again, just look at how you're dressed. What are you doing? He said, I work for Raytheon Missile Systems in the Human Resources Department. I'm getting married in 2 months. I said, that's remarkable. I was so excited and so happy. And I rushed home that night to have dinner, and I was so excited to tell our family about that. What a great, marvelous transformation of a human being. And as I started to tell the story, there were some glistening eyes around the table as we all came to realize that middle-aged woman was my wife. And that young man was our son, Garrett. See, in our family, we practice serving others. We don't just talk about it. When we see people in need, we do something about it. My personal purpose statement is to improve the human condition wherever I find it. So I can't walk past a homeless person without recognizing them and respecting them. I can't drive past an automobile accident if there's no one there to help. My job is to be able to assist other people in bettering their lives. I think people are put in our paths to help. And how many times do we ignore the people and circumstances that are put in our path because we're too busy? We don't have time. They might be a drug addict, they might be an alcoholic, they might be violent, they might be a lot of things. Well, yeah, they might be. But they might be really good people who've had a hard turn in luck, too. Our job is to facilitate the betterment of society, to have an impact on individual lives. And I would tell you, you got to do that in the workplace as well. When you see someone crying, when you know someone's having a hard time, you have to step into that situation and improve them. And when you do that, you prove the loyalty of who you are. When I was running Providence Service Corporation, we took over that company. It was $1 billion in revenue, 10,000 employees. We're trying to reshape the culture of that company, as we did with every company we built. There was a storm that swept across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. You may remember a few years ago there was an ice storm. This was about 2013, 14. It was a terrible storm. And there was a young single mother with 2 children who was in New Orleans and headed our New Orleans operation. And there was an electrical fire that night, and she barely got her 2 children out. Her dogs both burned up, her car burned up, everything they owned burned in that fire to the ground. We have in all of our businesses an emergency telephone tree or contact tree, right, where it works its way up the ladder. Whoever has to know gets to know quickly. And so she had contacted someone she worked with who contacted others, boom, boom, boom. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I got a call saying told me what happened. Now, I'm the CEO of this business. What do I do? She's in New Orleans, I'm in Arizona. What do I do? What's your answer? What do I do? What would you do?
Get her somewhere safe.
Get her help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Their resources, whatever she needs.
Okay. All right. I agree. Anything else? What else would you do?
Find out who you have close.
I'm sorry?
Find out who you got closest to.
Who you got closest to the action? Yeah? Okay. All right. Any others? I'm sorry? Call her. Okay. So here's what I did. I chartered a jet. In 4 hours, I was hugging her. 3 hours later, we had her in an apartment. We'd shopped for her clothes. We had her a new car. We had all the food she had to have. We had her kids back in school. They only missed a half day of school. She was back at work that afternoon. How do you think that sat with 10,000 employees? How fast do you think the word spread that the CEO cared enough to go see her personally? Helped us reform the culture of the company around caring, right? Because we're our brothers and sisters' keepers. We have an obligation to take care of each other. And we can't shirk from that responsibility. And when we do, I think we are lesser because of it. So we have to be careful about that. We have to be thoughtful about that. You and I have been blessed to have our positions. We're in unique positions to influence lives of others. We have resources at our disposal. I believe we need to use those resources and our time, talent, and energies to benefit others. And when we do that, our businesses run better, our families run better, our communities run better, because that's the obligation we have. Remember, that's the nanosecond in time. 75, 80 years, it's gone. Do the math right now. How are you doing? How many seconds in a day, by the way? There are only 2 people in the room who are able to use that because they low IQ. 86,400 seconds in a day. If you live to be 80 years old, how many hours are there?
6.4 million. That's 6.4 seconds.
No, too high. 700,000. 700,000 hours.
Oh, wow.
28.
You said seconds.
Oh, okay. 28,000 days. That's what we give on planet Earth. That's it. So do the math really quickly. Where are you? Where are you in the number of hours? If you're 40 years old, you've lived half your life. What are you going to do with the other half? You completely satisfied with everything you've done to date? Perfect life. Wouldn't change a thing, right?
I don't agree with that because you're 80, which means you'd be done right now. And you're
Well, I was showing this math to one of our granddaughters, and she's a math major. And she said, Dad, you should, or Granddad, you should be dead now. Yeah.
But as you know, life expectancy is just going up for people who are taking care of
It is, but not in my generation. Not in my generation. It is for your generation, and it's even more so for millennials and Gen Zs, right? And by the way, we can get into talking about them and hiring them and what that means for culture and organizations and so forth, because there's a whole body of research on that stuff. The whole idea is that there are moments in time where we make critical decisions about who we are and what we believe in. And you better be doggone consistent about that and make good choices. We'll miss it once in a while, but you got to make good choices. And when you're a leader, as you all are in this room, those choices are known by lots of people as to how good they are or aren't. So just be smart about this stuff, right? Just be smart about this stuff. There was a young couple that bought a new home. And in the home, along their dining room wall, were windows. And then they could look into their neighbor's backyard. And on sunny days, the lady next door would oftentimes hang out the laundry on the line to dry by sunlight. And every time they came down to have their coffee in the morning, and she was doing that in the next door, in the next yard, the woman would say to her husband, you know, somebody needs to teach her how to wash clothes. Her clothes that she's hanging out are always dirty. Nobody's ever taught her how to wash clothes. And time after time came down and kept saying, her clothes are always dirty. It's just so sad. One morning they came down and the woman exclaimed to her husband, look, her clothes are all clean. Somebody's taught her how to do laundry. And the husband said, well, not really. I came down early and washed the windows. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. What I'm asking you to do this morning in our time together is to take the filters out of your brain and the way you see life, clean them off really well, and pop them back in and see life differently. Because everything can be better than it is. Right? Everything can be better than it is. So just try to think about how you want to do those kinds of things. And Rabbi Kushner wrote a book called Living a Life That Matters. And he said this, our souls are not hungry for fame, comfort, and wealth. Our souls are hungry for meaning, for the sense that we have figured out how to live so that our lives actually matter. So that the world will be at least a little bit different and a little bit better for our having passed through it. That's the nanosecond. That's the nanosecond. How are you going to do that, right? How are you going to do that? That's the challenge. I've got 2 presentations that we haven't gotten to yet. Some really cool slides. So it's just this notion that maybe we can do it through storytelling and stuff, right? But it's this notion that the world is moving really fast. So one of the slide presentations is called Exponential Impact. In a world that's moving exponentially, how do you have impact? The world is moving ever-increasing speed. All of you have probably been on ChatGPT. Yeah. Do you think that's revolutionary? Yeah. It may be as big as cloud computing, right? The whole artificial intelligence thing is moving so quickly, so unbelievably, that's going to impact everything you do in your business, your personal lives. And better understand it and get up to speed on it, right? Now, I'm a migrant to technology. You are native to technology. Millennials and Gen Zs, it's just second nature to them, right? They live that way. So it's much more difficult for the boomer generation to integrate new technology into our lives. A lot easier for you. Get to know what it is. Understand artificial intelligence. Understand the broad issues around artificial intelligence, what can happen. Just recently, Elon Musk, Bill Gates both said we need to stop artificial intelligence until we decide how we're going to use it. It can be so dangerous, and we don't know where it's going, right? So there's a lot of discussion going on around that. But the exponential impact for us is, do you notice that in your own business? That the world is moving faster. It just is. Now, you either get on board and move as fast as the world is moving, or you get left behind. You know why we have so many angry people in the world and so many unhappy people in the world? Many of them are being left behind. Many of them can't keep pace and keep up, whether it's technology or other things. And so as a result of that, they feel very frustrated. They carry that into the voting booth and other places as to what candidates they support or don't support. And we're seeing this divisiveness across the world in politics that's largely fueled not by the issues themselves, but by the sense of abandonment, the sense of we can't keep up, the sense that the world's moving too fast. So be thoughtful about that, because you have people with whom you work, your colleagues and associates and friends in business every day, who are experiencing various degrees of that frustration. And how are you dealing with that? What kind of educational forums do you have in your business? What outside speakers are you bringing in to address your teams and your people that you work with every day? What kind of library do you have for books to be checked out? What kind of book reports do you ask of your people that they can report back to your management teams? All those are vehicles for continuing education and continuous growth and improvement. So life is a lot of fun, right? But there are some big challenges out there, big challenges. It can be easy as humor. We can make fun of things today while we're sitting here, but there's a whole bunch of serious stuff going on in the world, and we better get on board and understand it. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Question.
Yes?
What was your plan or vision when you went to go change the culture of a 10,000 person company?
So let me give you the numbers. When we took over the company, it was a public company. We took over the company. The stock price was $10 a share. It produced $60 million in EBITDA on $1 billion in revenue. And it had 10,000 employees. 24 months later, after having converted the culture, and I'll answer your question in a second. Changing the culture and the environment. The company was different. The $10 stock price was $55 a share. The $60 million in EBITDA was $260 million. We had 17,000 employees, no longer 10,000 employees. We were in 14 countries instead of just US-centric. And we had $2.5 billion in revenue. You know, how does that happen in 24 months? It happens because of some of the things that have been said, right? And that is the people that we work with will determine the success of the organization. If they are believers in what we're doing, and there's a path forward for them to be successful together with us, right, then we have an opportunity. So a week after becoming the majority shareholder and CEO and chairman, I had to go to Wall Street and explain to the analysts what we were going to do with the company because it had been languishing. The guys that took it public, all friends of mine, I was chairman of the board, the guys that took it public all had become multimillionaires when they took it public. And so they were more interested in cars and boats and planes and restaurants and homes, and they weren't paying attention to shareholder value. So it was necessary for me to terminate the CEO and the CFO, who were both very close friends of me. That was a tough Sunday morning. I replaced them because the board insisted, and I said, at 70 years of age, I'm really not interested in running another public company. And they said, we need you there. And I said, okay, I'll do it for 3 years, and that's it. So we started. And we had a very specific plan for changing it. And cascading, in a big company, you've got to cascade values and vision and everything. So the first thing we did is we brought 50 people together from all levels of the organization. We sat down for 3 days and we created a vision statement. Then we created our values. Nobody was going to get out of the room until we got those done. It took us 3 days to do it.
What were the values?
We had a professional facilitator from the outside. I'd have to go look them up for you, okay? We've had several companies since then, so I don't want to confuse the situation. This was a huge, one of the largest public mental health, behavioral health companies in the world. And so we started about doing that, and we had a specific plan. We identified change agents who carried the message. Those 50 people all became champions for us in various parts of the organization. And we began putting out material, publicizing stuff, posters to go up, stuff to be sent out via email and text and all. So it was a continuous communication campaign, and we were able to convert it. Things like going out to help that lady in New Orleans helped us. Things like me visiting and meeting every single one of the 10,000 employees in the first 280 days. So had a private jet, and I went and visited every single employee and met every employee. We never once talked about revenue or profits. We talked about where are you going with your life, what do you want to do, what's important to you. We instigated the Dream On program in that particular company, which helped us a great deal. So all of those things combined helped us move the company really quickly. And what happens when you get happy people working for you, Cameron's exactly right, they produce extraordinary results. And when you have unhappy people who don't like you and the work you're doing, they don't produce at high levels. They just don't. That's true of basketball teams, right? It's true of sports teams all across the board. It's true. When you get people who are cohesive, working together, real teammates, care about each other and love each other, it's amazing what you can do. But you have one dissenter from that and you got a problem. The other thing is you have to get bad apples out of your business as quickly as possible. As soon as you realize someone doesn't fit, you need to eliminate them from your business. Most of all, you have to get toxic people out of your business. There are people in every business who suck the air out of the room and the air out of other people who are working for you because of their behavior, what they say. They undermine you, they undercut you, and everything you're trying to do. You have to get toxic people out of your business. You have to get toxic people out of your lives. If there's someone toxic in your life today, you need to seriously think about disengaging because they are hurting you. They're not helping you. Please.
Can I ask a question? When you talk about getting toxic people in the organization, we have this very challenge of how do you get the support of the rest of the leadership team to execute on that? We're family started business and everyone is family.
Yeah, second and third generation business, I mentor a lot of second, third generation business, just a lot tougher. Just a lot tougher. And I'm not saying there's an easy way to do that. But you've got to identify who's the power in the family that calls the shots for the family. And then you got to have that conversation with the family.
That's the resistant one.
Yeah, and sometimes you can't overcome that.
Yeah.
Now, there are ways you can have them assassinated. You can do other kinds of things. I know people. I'm just saying. Yeah.
Could you go on, you said you fired the CEO and the CFO. Are they personal friends or business friends?
Personal friends.
They were personal
I met them through business, but they became personal friends. Very good friends.
Right. So-
Good
so
people.
it's- So mixing business with personal.
Well, because
you
I
have
was,
to cross that bridge sometimes.
well, because I was one of the founders of the company, and I was chairman of the board for all those years before we took it public and when we took it public and so forth. So I knew them very well, right? Because you become more than business colleagues in that setting, right? Because you know each other so well. But it just became obvious to us that we had to change. And we did that.
So it was a tough bridge to go across.
Yeah, it's tough, tough. That's why we get paid the big bucks. Okay? Our job is to make decisions. You know, you always have to think about what's best for the whole, not the individual. What's best for the whole. And if that means eliminating an individual, you got to do that. And you're not always, as soon as you know a person has to leave the organization, you need to terminate that person as soon as possible. Because you know what? That person knows it's time to terminate them. Many times I'll terminate somebody and they'll say, "What took you so long?" Now, when you, bless you, when you terminate somebody, a lot of people get involved in discussions and negotiations and all. Just stop that. Your discussion with someone that you've decided to terminate, and they probably know, should be very brief. You know, Sally, thank you very much for your contributions to the company. I really appreciate it. This is not personal, this is business. There's a person in the next room who's going to help you prepare your resume and get you ready for your next opportunity. Thank you very much. That's the total extent of what I'm going to say. The meeting is over at that point in time. Don't get involved in having a long discussion and justifying what you're doing. You don't have to and you shouldn't. Just get it done and move on. Don't feel bad about it. It's just part of the business deal. Okay? Does that make any sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. Gosh, this time has gone so fast. I can't believe it. There was something else. So let me give you really quickly some things, and I'll tell you a couple of stories before we wrap up. First of all, McKinsey just finished a study. McKinsey Consulting Company just completed a study that I thought was really interesting. Released it about maybe 30 days ago. And that is, what are 5 characteristics of agile leaders? As we look forward, post-COVID, this is new leadership time. You have a chance to review and renew everything you're doing as a leader. But post-COVID is going to be different. So here are the 5 characteristics of agile leaders. This is a big global study that they did. First of all, they are driven by shared purpose and passion. Driven by shared purpose and passion. More than ever, purpose is the reason to be in business. And let me ask you this. Do you have a company with a purpose, or do you have a purpose with a company? They're totally different thoughts. Do you have a company with a purpose or a purpose with a company? Was your company built around purpose, or is the purpose built around your company? Very different considerations, very different thoughts, okay? So shared purpose and passion. Next, the future companies will be networks of empowered teams. The traditional hierarchical structure will be non-existent going forward. You're not going to see a pyramid with a CEO at the top, you second, and then a bunch of people at the bottom. And even if you invert that, as many people did for psychological reasons over the years, that doesn't matter either. We're talking about empowered, self-directed teams. We took our company, we have an IT staffing company focused on cybersecurity in Houston, Texas, growing very rapidly, but we knew to get that next level, we had to break up the organization, and so we created self-directed work teams. They build their own budget, they hire and fire their own people, they share in the success, they have coaches who help them, but they don't report to anyone. We doubled the size of the company in 18 months by doing that. Self-directed work teams.
Can you reread that one?
Yeah. A network of empowered teams. Companies will be networks of empowered teams. So you're going to be able to release the control over people that work for you and give them the right to succeed or fail. You give them the task, you give them the outcome, the time, whatever you need to give them, and then you let them operate. Let them go do it. Okay?
I could interject, there's a great book that came out by Josh Person, Irresistible.
Right.
Was it about me? No.
It speaks to that exact.
Yeah. And the guy who really created this is Francis Lalo, and there's a thing called Reinventing the Organization, a book called Reinventing the Organization. Francis Lalo is the author. He's a French guy, and the book is based on a Belgium company that did this years and years ago and just exploded. So think about different ways to organize, to empower people, create networks of those people. How then do these teams relate to each other in your organization? You create these networks, it's powerful. It's really interesting. The third thing, The future of organizations will be defined by rapid learning and decision-making cycles. Too many companies get bogged down in layers of management. They have too many meetings. They get too many things. Right? Meetings suck, right, Cameron? This whole notion is that how can you be more efficient? How can you accelerate learning and decision-making cycles? Because the world's moving so fast, if you're languishing in your decision-making, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be hurt. Rapid learning and decision-making cycles. These new organizations, that's what they'll be. The fourth is the organizational culture will be built around purpose. Built around purpose. So if you haven't defined your purpose in your organization, that is something you want to do. And that's one of the ways you can build culture, is to rally people. So in our company in Houston, we've decided that we're going to end hunger. And our people are really excited about it. We've showed them how they can work on hunger projects in their community, because we're a distributed workforce all across the United States. And then we've shown how we're going to focus our resources. My partner and I, we own 100% of the company, and we've decided we're never going to sell it, we're never going to have private equity, we're going to harvest this company. And it throws off about $20 million a year, and we're going to invest that in marginalized communities and marginalized people. 100% of our profits, we're never going to sell it. It's a Patagonia model, if you will, slightly different than Patagonia. Patagonia really built a board of trustees, a trust within which those decisions we made. Ours is slightly different. But it's this notion of how can we use our corporations for good rather than for personal wealth. How can we do that? Okay. And the last one, you'll oversee the implementation of next generation technology. We're talking about ChatGPT, artificial intelligence. You'll have to oversee the next generation of technology. So focus on those, give those some thought, because all 5 of those are meaty subjects for your organization. Things you can do. I think, Cameron, we're going to have another meeting so I can just show my slides sometime. I like my slides. They're really pretty. Okay, let me give you, we've been studying what's coming out of COVID. What are the trends coming out of COVID that are going to change the world? Have you thought you spent any time on that? Some of them will be really obvious to you. Yeah, some of them won't be. Okay? First of all is direct to consumer. Direct to consumer. This jacket I was measured for electronically. I ordered it. I got it 24 hours later. Okay? I don't need to go to a men's store to get the jacket I want. I don't need to go to a car dealership to buy the car I want. I build it online. I price it, I order it, I go to the dealership to pick it up. So things are changing really rapidly. Car dealerships will not be in the future what they are today. They'll be more the Tesla model, right? More the Lucid model than they are what they are right now. Second, telemedicine. We've always had telemedicine. We've done it in our business for a long time, but now behavioral health, mental health is using telemedicine. So you're probably not going to go sit in a waiting room for common stuff. Colds, flu, that you're probably not going to sit. I mean, I hate sitting in a waiting room with a bunch of sick people. That doesn't help me any. So doctors are they're going to be seeing you on a screen, and they're going to diagnose you on a screen. It's going to be true of mental health and physical health. That's coming really rapidly and doing more and more. Okay, online education, we talked about that. Clear, right? Educational system was really bad about it. It was really painful for our children. It was really hard for kids. And most school systems did not adapt well at all, and still haven't figured it out, right? Education is one of the last bastions of change. They'll fight change in every way. Why? Because it's jobs and benefits for teachers, right? And we've been fighting that battle in Arizona really hard for 20 years. Next, online work. Current studies, you get varying degrees. I've seen a bunch of different studies, but right now the studies we're focused on, 40% of the people in the workforce do not want to return to an office. 40%. That's maybe 45% or maybe it's 35%, but it's a big number. When Goldman Sachs, a year after COVID started, Goldman Sachs announced strongly, the CEO said, we want everybody back in their offices in New York City by July 1st, 2021. He had 47% of his people refuse to come back in the office and basically stated, if you want us back in the office, we quit. He quickly backed away from that. Now hybrid models are being used, right? So you have to be thoughtful about your requirement for work. There are some companies where people have to show up, right? You think about manufacturing, you think about other kinds of things, right? But there are lots of businesses where that's not true. So about 40% of the workforce, so what's going to be your policy? In a labor short market, when there are enough workers to fill the jobs that you have, how are you going to do that? Okay. Next, geography is history. Where you live no longer matters. The exodus from California is specific. Any of you from California? It's estimated that 2.8 million people over the next 3 years will move out of California. 700,000 already have. And they've moved to places like Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Kansas, where you have rural environments, smaller environments, and they commute via technology.
In Texas.
Taxes are much easier, yeah. Okay, so geography is no longer history. It just doesn't matter. People used to live near their workplace, for example, or they near commuting lines where they could get a bus or a trolley or something. It's just not necessary anymore. We have a woman who's a great contributor for us, but she was an individual contributor, and she came to me one day and she said, "Do you care where I live?" And I said, "Not as long as you contribute the way you've been." She said, "Great." So she sends me pictures. She's living on the beach in Bali. That was her
Can you
dream.
make a quick comment on, there's things like biotech and there's certain industries where they talk about having a mass of people that interact, share ideas, and that allows you, the companies to grow. If your geography doesn't make any difference and you don't create those centers like San Francisco, Boston, San Diego, biotech, does it still, geography still matter for some industries?
Think about Apple building a multi-billion-dollar campus, and they can't get people to fill the offices. There is, I believe, my generation probably believes more than others, but I believe there is really good positives that come out of interaction. Sitting across from somebody, say, "Does this make sense to you? Did I make a mistake? Or I made a mistake. Can you help me?" Right? There's a lot of interaction where that's positive, but I'm telling you that the generations that are coming to work don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. No. Next, there's going to continue to be supply chain disruption. Supply chain disruption. And 3D manufacturing is going to become ever more prevalent in our communities. So in the supply chain, there are 5 steps: raw materials, manufacturing, distribution, retail, customer. Those are the 5 steps. What happens if you eliminate 2 of those steps? Tell me what that does to employment. Tell me what that does to buildings, right? Change it. Which would be eliminated? You got to have the raw materials. You got to have manufacturing. But manufacturing can be done 3D in your community. It doesn't have to be done in a big plant somewhere else. You can eliminate distribution and retail. Okay? So how we process raw materials, how those get manufactured, how they get to us as consumers is really interesting, going to be very different. And it's also going to be disrupted by international politics, as we saw with China shipping goods to the United States. Right? That's going to happen more and more often. Our suburbs will become villages, like in the old days, right? Because people won't have to commute to work. And so they want all the services of the inner city they want in their village. And so housing developments tend to be built today around shopping centers. Those shopping centers, you looked recently, they're pretty vacant. And they're going to be more vacant going forward. It's not a time to be in commercial real estate, okay? And so those centers are being repurposed. And if you can see that almost all across the United States today, they're being repurposed. But the thing is, the villages will want those core services delivered to them in that village. And so it's going to be different. Core services of a city and a community are going to be different than they were in the past, okay? Mass personalization and customization. As I said, I decided I wanted a jacket because I wanted to try to impress Cameron today. And so I went online and got this jacket, so it was really easy. But mass personalization and customization, and it'll be delivered to your home. You should buy shares in Amazon. They're going to continue to deliver in a big way. Okay? So it's this notion of being able to order anything you want online and have it delivered to you in time. And then there are a couple others. Governments are essentially insolvent. Governments are insolvent. Governments do not have the money to pay for the unfunded mandates that they have promised citizens. Therefore, debt continues to rise. So literally, every city, state, and the nation are insolvent in the United States today. If you put a true balance sheet together, there's not enough money to pay for the funded mandates, meaning Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. There's not enough money to pay for it. Okay? So it's all a game of moving things around.
Are there any countries that you see that are better than insolvency?
Not a lot.
There's one.
New Zealand is better. Australia's a little bit better.
There's one country in the G7 that has a debt to GDP ratio under 100%.
So if you study history, once debt exceeds 100% of GDP, the nose of the airplane tilts down, and it's a very difficult recovery. We're currently at 125% of GDP in the United States, and it's accelerating. Okay, so it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Next is there is a bill that's been introduced in Congress, but it's unlikely to pass. People are thinking about it, and there are certain elements of the political base that want this to pass, and that would be a guaranteed stipend or dividend for every man, woman, and child in the United States of $1,000 a month. Think of a family of 5. They would get $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. What is their incentive to go to work?
Didn't we just say they couldn't give the money out that they're already offering people? And now they're offering people money?
They aren't yet. It's a bill that could be, but it's an idea that's being floated through, okay? So just be alert for it. When that happens, you think hiring people is going to be tough today? Where's the labor force going to go? And lastly, I would just suggest to you, there is a growth of the political elite in this country, something we've always avoided, but there's a growth of the political elite in this country, meaning that people want power and position and title, but not problem solving. But not problem solving. So there's doesn't pay enough.
That's been true for a while.
Oh, you know what? It's time for us to say goodbye, but I want to share a story with you before I go. Is that all right, Cameron? Are we okay with that? All right. Years ago, there was a young lawyer in Johannesburg, South Africa, who was leading an insurrection against apartheid. The cause was right, but it was difficult. And it was difficult because the white government was battling them. It was hand-to-hand combat in the streets, buildings were being burned down, and soon the government turned to violence, in fact, shooting people, killing people. In that process, the leaders of this young rebellion, known as the ANC, the African National Congress, were arrested. They were led by a young lawyer named Nelson Mandela. They were sentenced to life in prison on Robben Island. Robben Island is 3 miles off the coast of Cape Town, an isolated island. And when those prisoners were taken there by boat and they walked off onto the dock and toward their cells, they were spat upon, called names, and told they hoped they would be dead and that they would die in the prison. They were marched to their prison cells, 6 by 12. A small 2-inch mattress, a blanket, a place for human waste and fresh water, and a 6 by 6-inch window that looked out into a courtyard. Every morning they were given mush for breakfast, 7 a.m., and marched down to a limestone quarry where they broke rocks all day long. Marched back at 7 o'clock at night, given more mush, and told to sleep. Some did die there. 21 and a half years later, the remaining group marched down that same dock to a boat to be taken to Pollsmoor Prison in the center of Cape Town. I've been in Pollsmoor Prison. I've seen what it's like. I've been in Robben Island. I've been in Nelson Mandela's cell. Pollsmoor Prison, when they walked down that dock to get on the boat, the same men that spat on them when they came saluted and called him Mr. Mandela. When he arrived at Pollsmoor Prison, he was given a 1,000-square-foot cell and a balcony where he could grow his vegetables. And he was given exclusively a white guard to protect him and take care of him. Pollsmoor Prison was designed for 3,000 men. Currently has 7,600 men triple bunked in 6 by 12-foot cells. They are allowed out of those cells 1 hour a day. I met with this white guard who had been the captain of the guard for Nelson Mandela. I said, "What was Mr. Mandela like?" He said, "He's the most wonderful man, the best man I've ever known." In 1993, I was coming down the elevator in the Hay Adams Hotel across from the White House. I had some business at the White House. And I opened the doors, or the doors opened for me in the elevator, and I could see there were Secret Service people all over the lobby. And what that means is somebody important was in the lobby. And I was looking around the lobby, there was Nelson Mandela, the man that I thought was the greatest living leader in the world at that time. I'd studied everything about him. As I said, I read everything about him. I'd talked to members of his staff who worked for him. I was curious, how does a man go from prisoner to president? How does that work? And so I really wanted to meet him. So I said in the loudest voice I could, I want to meet Mr. Mandela. And the security force, the Secret Service, said, not today, and held me back. But Mr. Mandela did hear me. And he invited him over. Let him pass, he said. And as I approached him, he motioned for me to sit on the couch next to him. And I sat down. Before I could even sit down, he began to ask me questions. What's your name? What's your family like? Where do you live? Why are you here? Why are you going to the White House? Just fired questions. Those beautiful blue eyes, that wonderful smile, that soft voice, completely riveted on me, as if there was no one else in the lobby. And finally, he had to take a breath. He'd asked me about 8 questions, and finally he had to take a breath. And I had to ask the only question that I was interested in asking him. What was my question? What do you think my question was? What made you change? How did you go from terrorist prisoner to president of South Africa? He said, a poem. I said, a poem? He said, yes, a poem. A guard gave me a poem. And he said, it took me a while to understand the language of the poem, but once I understood the poem, it changed my life forever. It changed my heart. It changed everything about me. What was my next question? What was the poem? This is the poem. It's called Invictus by William Hensley. Maybe a lesson for us. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I've not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of these years shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. You and I are responsible totally for who we are and what we do. We can't blame others. We can't point to others. We must acknowledge and accept everything we are and everything we become is us and our control. And when we realize that, just as Nelson Mandela did, we change everything about our lives. It's been wonderful to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation, Cameron. I really appreciate it.